Hello everybody and thank you for watching. My name is Maria Carriedo and I will guide you through the process I used to create a sci-fi character for games. I guess I should start by saying that starting with a good design is really crucial. You can be the best modeler, but if the concept you choose or were given has no appeal, then ultimately your model is not going to look that good. In this case, I went with a concept by Bruno Gauthier Leblanc, whose skills allow me to exploit mine and really push a design and get the most out of it. So let's get started. We'll be creating a plan of attack by just laying out the concept in Photoshop and painting over the drawing in just flat colors. You can really see how many meshes are you gonna have to do and how are you gonna start modeling them. If you are gonna poly model or you're gonna sculpt from scratch and then retop over that, it really depends on the shape and just a personal preference on how you are more comfortable as a modeler and as an artist to work. So in my case, I decided to start my base mesh in Maya, and I started with a previous model base mesh of a female I already had, and there's nothing wrong on using base meshes if it gets you there faster, although it is good practice to create your own base meshes from scratch. So here you can see I have very basic geometry. I'm just blocking out the shapes and the proportions of the concept for later sculpting in more intricate modeling. But you can see here that it's mostly just basic geometric shapes. Here you can see it's a little more advanced now. It's pretty much ready for sculpting. You want your base mesh to have a nice distribution of quads, so when you smooth in ZBrush, it's not going to collapse itself or like smooth too much and retain the shape that you want. Here we can see the sculpt of the face, at least the first stage of it, as well as some basic blocking of the shape of the body and the suit, as well as the heels. And here I'm just going to show you what I did just to sculpt the heel and give it like a nicer shape to it, and just sculpting the details. Here I'm using the Damien standard brush. I find it's really good when you want to carve small little details with a combination of the clay buildup. With this combo you can really give nice little cuts and add some bulk to the edges. I also use a lot on this stage the move brush, which is just allows me to place the objects and the proportions of the base mesh as closely as the final shape as possible. For this stage where I give some wear to the straps in the boot, I use a brush that I really like called the Mallet Fast brush, and this you can find in the Lightbox brushes. It's really good also to make like wood planks and stuff that you just want to chip away. For this little light in the boots, I use the H polished brush just to give it like a more hard surface look and get rid of the soft edges and keep some crispness to the metal. Here we can see our final sculpt, or close to the final sculpt. And let's move to retopology. Here we have our boot. It's our high res, and we're gonna just keep our base mesh next to it so you can see what we have so far. It's not bad, but we definitely want to optimize it because it's a little too high for what we need right now. So sometimes your base mesh, if your base mesh is good, you don't need to retopologize the whole thing. You can use it and use Quadro or other techniques that you might have just to fix the topology and make it more game mesh compatible. So here I'm using Quadro and the modeling toolkit in Maya 2015. It's really helpful to make a mesh stick to the high poly surface if you make it live, and to create polygons on top of this high poly sculpt. And a good note here is that you have to make your base mesh a live object, and you do that by modify make live, and this way when you Quadro over it, whatever you do is going to stick to the surface. Here you see I'm getting rid of some edges that we don't need and then just relaxing the surface. You relax by hitting shift in your keyboard and just clicking over your mesh. You can either do that or just use your mouse or your tablet to move the edges around, and it's amazing because it always sticks to the surface, so it's really helpful. You want an even separation of quads, so when you make your UVs and create your normal maps, you have a very better distribution and therefore a better mapping. Here in the heel area, it's a little too high, so we're gonna get rid of some of these edge loops. A good way to do this is by collapsing edges. You can collapse one by one, or if you select the edge ring, you can collapse all of them. And sometimes you have to try this out. It's not going to work perfectly while you're collapsing, but it's a good method to just getting rid of polygons where you don't need them. You can see we're getting rid of even more polygons. This is not a linear process. It's something you have to tweak constantly to get the result you want. But at this stage, I think we're pretty much set. And remember to soften your edges, because in this case you don't want any hard edges. So this is our low res and our base mesh. We got it down considerably and we retain the shape. So that's when you know that you did a good job, because you can only go that low enough until you start seeing weirdness or your objects too tessellated. Okay, so now for the map generation, we're going to export our high-res. Make sure your normals, everything is on. You could really leave the materials on, but we don't want any extra files in there, so let's just export this like this right now. And it takes a little bit because it's quite high. Once you have your, well, you can see that the high-res doesn't have UVs and our low-res has these UVs. For the game mesh, we're gonna have the UVs packed tighter than this, but for a higher res mapping, we're gonna keep it like this, but we're ultimately gonna change this later. So to load your objects, you just go to your desktop or wherever you left it and load your high res, then you load your low res and get rid of anything you might have later that you already used. You have your high res, low res, then baking options. We want to bake it pretty high. We can lower it later. For 2K, it's good to keep the edge padding in 16 in case you need to down-res, so you don't have to rebake your maps. We're gonna bake a normal map and ambient occlusion. After this, you go to the tools section and click on ray distance calculator. This basically just shoot rays between your high res and your low res, and calculates the distance on the vertices and on the geo, and creates a mesh out of that difference. Well, not a mesh, sorry, a map. So you just click on go, and you let it run for about 20 seconds or so, or until you see that the numbers are not moving anymore. So just give it some time. The higher the poly count is obviously gonna take longer. So after you're done, you just click on copy results and then you generate maps. So you wait a little bit for this, but it goes by pretty fast. It's not too bad. So this is our normal map. It looks pretty clean. Usually you want to see mainly just this purple color, not too much variance, unless you have like a crazy sculpt. But for these boots, they were pretty smooth, so you should be seeing something like this. And then the AO takes a little bit longer. But here is our AO, and you don't have to do anything else. But so we're gonna hide that, and just to see how it looks. Let's see. I'm gonna plug in into bump map. Let's do it again. You do this in Marmoset or somewhere else, but just let's see. Bump map, tangent space normals. And if we click, okay, filter off, and we source our file on our desktop, normals, and you can see it looks pretty good. Looks clean. I don't see any weirdness, and it works pretty well. So here it's the same thing in Marmoset. You can test it either way. If you're already in Marmoset, it's easier because it loads automatically. You just create a new material and you just plug in the normal map. That's all you have to do. And if you tweak anything in Photoshop and just save it, it will just reload it pretty fast. Okay, so let's move to the body retop. You can see I already started, but you can see that I'm keeping the edge loops following the shape of the body. We want to follow the shape of the breast, of the belt, and keep a loop in symmetry in the center. So I'm just going on drawing points with the quadro. It's a very handy tool for stuff like this. It makes it really fast, and you have a lot of flexibility for this. So I'm just doing obviously just half of it. We're gonna mirror it later. And as I said before, on the boots, it's not a linear process. It's something that takes some trial and error. But for this boot, we're gonna go pretty fast. And something also good for normal map making is that you want to keep following the shape of your sculpt. Like even like for this, it's not obvious, but for these material separation, we want to have an edge loop there so the map bakes cleaner. Here you can see I'm following the same rule, just trying to follow the shape of the sculpt. Trying to keep it low, but also trying to keep the silhouette as clean as possible, because normal maps will give you a lot of detail, but they're not going to clean the silhouette for you. You can see that I also followed the shape of the rib cage detail. Here we're gonna make a hole in the mesh through the normal map, so you really want to support that with edges. You can move your points around, and this helps you to sort of figure out where you're gonna connect your edges. It's okay to have triangles, obviously. You're not gonna get away with all quads, and that's okay because the engine triangulates it anyway. So don't worry, don't be afraid of triangles. Just add edge loops where you need them. If you hit shift in your keyboard, it should highlight an edge that you can add, and when you hit click, it adds it. Okay, so this is our final retopology for the body. It looks pretty good. We retain most of the shape, or well, we retain all the shape. So to do the normal maps first, we have to do the UVs. So I usually start by just doing a planar projection on C so I can see it in the UV editor and start cutting my seams so later I can export it into UV layout. For clothes, think of it as making pattern, like clothing patterns, and make your cuts where the natural seams of the clothing would be. Remember to make all your seams, all your cuts, so you can unfold it in the UV layout program. So the hands, just think of it as gloves. It takes a little time. Check that all your edges are selected so you can make the cut. And once you're in UV layout, you can just go into optimize and run. This will unfold all your UVs so you can see them flat. Here you can see I forgot to cut a seam, so make sure you cut all your seams. And hit run again. So sometimes it doesn't do a great job. So you can hit, like hover over the shell and hit Shift F. This will bloat it and then extend it again to have a more flat look in the end. Sometimes it helps when you cut some shells off and later reattach them. It's kind of like try and see what works better for each mesh. So for the legs here, I'm just detaching a part of the thigh, but I'll attach that later. I just want to extend it as much as I can. To weld, just hit W around the edges. And to cut, you can hit C. Make sure you have everything welded. The hands are a little tricky to unfold. It's very hard to get them perfect. Just make sure nothing is overlapping. It's okay if it's not perfectly unfolded as long as it's not overlapped. Takes a few tries, but in the end it works better. You can see the distribution, how unfolded everything is, and if you have some red parts, that means it's not getting as much space as it needs, and if you have some blue parts, it means it's getting too much space. So you want mostly green. To pack your UVs into one, just make sure they're all in the same square and hit pack all. Here are UVs. We're probably going to change this later for texturing. We're going to overlap them, most likely. So let's zero out our high res and export that. It takes a little while, it's pretty high. And we're gonna start our low res. Open X normal and do the same technique that we did with the boots. So we open our high, we open our low. We're going to baking options. We're going to do a 2K at 16 edge padding, and let's just name it to something that makes sense. Well, here you can bake more than just the normal or the ambient occlusion. It really depends on what you need, but for now we'll just say like that. We go to rate distance, click and go. When you see it stops, you stop it, copy results, close, and go to generate. No, mine looks pretty clean. Okay, and yeah, your looks good also. So we're gonna see how it looks in Marmoset. Just import our low res. Find it. Okay, so here it is. Create a new material, name it. Textures, let's go to body normals. And by just a simple drag and drop, you can apply the material. It looks pretty good. And for the occlusion map, it doesn't come by default. You have to just activate it, and you can also drag and drop the material. So you can see it looks pretty good, but we still have some work to do on these. You can tune it down a little if it's too strong for you. Especially in skin, this is pretty good. See, it works. You don't have any weird artifact. You can see it's still the same low res. The wireframe looks pretty good. Okay, so but we need to fix some stuff on the normal map. So sometimes when you sculpt and it's getting pretty high in ZBrush, you want to isolate some of the parts that you want to give extra detail. So this is our original sculpt, but in the concept, the center detail, the little holes, were a lot sharper, but we needed a lot more detail for that. So what I did here is just extracted the part that I needed and just sculpted exactly what I wanted without making our file any bigger, or at least a little less than. Okay, so we're gonna export the chest panel and the body. Just make sure in your export options you turn group off so it exports one whole mesh. So body, chest panel, high, or something like that. Okay. Well, what we actually need is just export these as one single object so we can rebake our maps and just get the detail and comp it later in Photoshop. So here we are back in Maya. Let's just add the high res the high res object that we just exported from Maya. We need the same low res, so that's fine. And let's just change the name so there's no confusion. Hit the tools again because the object changed. So here we have our new normal map, and we're just gonna comp this in Photoshop. Just give this new detail into the map that we had already baked, both the normals and the occlusion. You take the new and the old ones. Body normals, body occlusion. And this is, I find that this trick really helps. It makes you just work faster and get all the detail you want into one single map. So here's a difference on the map. We're only gonna transfer the detail on the chest. So with just simple masks and just save it, we can see that we have our crisp edges. And that's it for that. For the skin texturing, we're going to start in Photoshop, removing shadows and highlights that are too strong for our diffuse. For this, we're going to use the shadows and highlights in the image adjustments. Just play around with the settings. Don't go too far or it will start looking weird. It's going to look a little more orange, but that's okay because when you apply your subsurface shader, it's going to look fine. For the highlights, this adjustment doesn't remove, just go over with a clone stamp with a low opacity. Just get rid of obvious markings, because since we're gonna mirror this, we don't want anything too obvious that shows that we're actually mirroring the image. For little freckles and stuff, we can add that later, but this is mostly for our base. So I'm just going over. Very subtle. If you're gonna do the eyebrows and the eyelashes with real hair or cards or whatever you're gonna use, you have to remove those as well. For the eyebrows, I'm gonna leave them, but in this case, I do want to get rid of the eyelashes since we're gonna be using cards. So just use the same technique, just be careful trying to maintain the detail around the eyes. But remove the hairs. It takes some time, but in the end it's worth it because it will save you a lot of time later. You want to do that to all your other images for skin. Try to keep a similar skin tone as close as possible, because if not, it's going to look patchy and it's going to look very weird. But just go with this process around the whole image. Try to get rid of some skin imperfections. For example, her piercing, we don't really want that, or her gouge holes. It's gonna look a little weird, the color, but even it's kind of dead without the highlights. But remember that you're gonna get that from the engine. Once you plug in your spec map and your normal map, you're gonna get the real highlight that you want. You don't want any fake highlights on your texture itself. Do the same for the side and for the back. And once you're done, just save that as a JPEG and we'll jump into Mari. And we'll jump into Mari. Okay, so for Mari, just import your OBJ, and you can import your normal map as well. Here it's displaying incorrectly, but it displays fine in Marmoset. It's just the Mari thing right now. But just line up your image using the paint through tool, and you can stamp this and move it around with the grid tool to match your sculpt the best that you can. You have to bake this so it retains the modifications, because it's not gonna keep it otherwise. And so if you move the camera as well, the grid is on, you're gonna lose that. So just make sure you bake it first. So here I'm just going over and deleting some of the stretched parts. Make sure you have your edge mask on so you don't get those weird stretching in the sides. Right now we're just texturing half of the face since we're gonna mirror that. And Mari has a mirroring tool, but it's not very good since you have to keep your object right in the center. It doesn't just do it like in Modbox or something that just it's by object. Here it's just in the viewport, so it's kind of useless for what we're doing here. So don't worry about the other side, just make sure you have one side correct, and we can either mirror it here or in Photoshop. So what I'm trying to do here is to keep the skin as smooth as possible, and remove any patches. For the ears, it's kind of hard to see, but we're not really gonna get it exactly placed as we want, so sometimes it's easier just to paint the ears on with the skin color. So that's what I'm doing here, just using a part of the back, and it's gonna look weird, but you can just match the color later. Just skin with a low opacity. Making sure everything is covered, going under the chin. Painting the eyebrows again. This time without stretching, being more careful. And of course, we're not gonna use this eye. We're gonna actually do the eyes, but sometimes it's easier to see what you're doing if you have an eye there. The mouth is especially hard to texture because the folds and the picture is gonna be really hard to align. But just try to get as close as possible with the grid tool and the paint through tool. And once you're done with that, we can clean it up better in Photoshop. Here at the back, I'm just stamping with the back tool. With the back view on and the back picture. The hair, we're gonna fix that later also in Photoshop. It's maybe easier for you. It's a personal preference. The ears, these two little shells in the UV editor. Sometimes it's easier just to paint there, although you can get some seams if you're painting in the UV mode. So you might want to go over in the viewport in your ortho views. Here, getting rid of eyelashes. A brush I tend to use a lot for this is the soft brush. It's just a very soft, no hard edges brush, and I really like this one because it just paints through very seamlessly, and you can paint really softly for stuff like this. The skin is very easy to look patchy. So here we have pretty much done. We're just gonna clean up the nose. The nose is kind of hard to get right too because of the folds. So this looks really weird, but we're just gonna erase this. I really like this this soft brush because you can really clean. And here the skin brush just gives a nice little texture to the eraser. So this is how it looks in Marmoset. It's just a very basic subsurface skin shader. And the finished hair, we're going to use the Dither Alpha. And sometimes in the viewport it looks kind of weird, but just make a quick render image and open so you can see how the transparency is working. So here in Marmoset, we can see we're pretty much done. We have all of our textures in a pretty simple setup in Marmoset. I have it separated by material. I have body cloth, body metals, the boot leathers, the boot metals, and then I have the skin and the hair in its own group. If this way, it's just easier to assign the materials to everything, and just to keep one UV sheet per object. So for the fabric, we just have a very simple material. I have here a normal map. We can make it softer or not, but I'm just gonna leave it by default. We have our gloss map, which is solid colors with some little specks here and there to just more variety. The spec map is very similar to the albedo map, just a little darker, and our AO that we previously baked. So I'm going to show you real quick how I did this in Mari. The first layer is just a solid color layer. I just block out what color do I want each mesh to be. And if you add the AO, it's easier to paint, and sometimes you want your AO to be multiplied in your diffuse. It depends on how you're going to build the shader. You can either have your AO here or have it in the shader itself, not in the diffuse. So I'm gonna add some dirt. Make sure you put it under the AO so you don't paint over it. Oh, sorry, no, not dirt. We're gonna do some fabric first to give just like a different texture that we can later add to the normal map. So I have here some tileable textures of fabric, and we're gonna do that by selecting a shell. You make sure you have connectedness on, so it selects the whole shell, and you have it centered in your paint buffer. So just drag and drop and press Shift and Control and left mouse click to resize. Once you have it more or less in the size you want, make sure you turn on repeat on the top and no stencil, so it's just a complete a paint through. So when you click stamp, you're gonna see that it stamps the whole selection, and when you zoom in, it's gonna resize itself because it's still floating in the paint buffer. It's not baked yet. And once we bake, we see a pretty good result. It looks pretty good, but we now need it in the back as well. So for this, we're gonna do the same. Select this shell, and we're later gonna erase that little patch of black fabric. That will be a different fabric, and try to keep it the same size as the other one. Okay, so now we have it. There's a little seam here, so you can see, but we can fix that pretty easily. So if you go in and paint directly in your viewport, make sure repeat is on, but this time we're not gonna stamp. We're just gonna paint with a very soft brush. Just gonna paint over it. It's a little small, but you can tweak that. Getting the sizing right, something like that. And this way you can fix your seams really easy. If you make the selection of this, you'll only bake the what you have painted into that, because when you're on the viewport, it's really easy to paint on other objects if you have it to paint all, and it's the same object, so you want to make sure it's not. And you can either set this to multiply or to whatever you want, or layer it out in the color or whatever. So well, that way, that's how I did the fabric. Make sure you keep it in a separate layer so we later convert it into a normal map. Well, here I find it very useful to use real photographs, even if it's something that has nothing to do. This is just a wall, but I'm using it to give like a dirt kind of feel, like a dirt or wear. So I'm here using the paint through tool with a very soft brush. I'm just going over it, painting some dirt into the fabric, because you don't want a pristine looking suit. Like you want it to look like she's been walking around and exploring some planet or something. Here, well, these are the default Maria brushes, but you can always import your Photoshop brushes if you don't like the ones that are here. For what I'm doing now, it's fine, but I do import my own brushes. Here, even if it's like a skin brush, I find it really useful to just break up a little bit of the what we painted so it doesn't look that straight. And here I'm just using the eraser. It's not even a paintbrush, it's just the shape we're giving to the eraser. So make sure you pick that so you can move around. Line it up how it was, you pick it. And just go again over it. If you already baked it, you would need to use the paint mode clear to get rid of stuff that's already baked, because the eraser is only for stuff that it's already in your paint buffer. In this case, we're going to use the paint option just to erase stuff that we already painted. And you can see it's also floating in the paint buffer, and you also have to bake the clear options. Here I'm revealing some of the dirt that I already painted, and you can see that we use the same technique for the vest of the fabric. I only erase the edges just to make it more interesting. Another dirt layer. Okay, so here we see, and I mean you can keep going forever on these. It just depends on how much detail you want and how much resolution you're gonna get. Because here we have a 2K map, but in reality you may need to go lower. So you don't want your textures to look pixelated. So it just depends on how your UV tiles are mapped. But well, let's move on. For tiny little detail in the normal map, sometimes it's better to do it other ways than in X normal, because if your UV tile it's kind of small, or the shell that you're gonna use it's small in your UV tile, it's easier to go into Photoshop and just paint with a paintbrush the detail you want. In this case, the stitches. We're gonna use Quixel to do this. So for these, I just draw with my paint tool. Sorry, with my pen tool. I draw exactly where I want it. Trying to keep it pretty clean. Let's go over. Exactly the shape that I want. Once you have that, you want to have a brush of the detail that you want to paint. In this case, I have a stitching set. Let me put this in white so you can see. It's a stitching brush. You have to make it smaller to the size that you are going to use. About the size is fine, maybe a little bit bigger. Because once you turn that path into a brush, onto a stroke, sorry, you can't really tweak it. You would have to do it again. So you just right click, stroke path, brush, and there you have it. It's completely separated from your path, so you can't really tweak it. You can tweak the path and redo the step, but just so you know. Here you can see, well, it's separated, but just get rid of that path because Quixel will recognize that path and it's going to want to do that one. Okay, so now that we have that and the bottom one, we can merge it. We go into Quixel, and Quixel is really simple. We're just going to use Quixel's undo. We click on that little purple button and this tiny UI appears. It's going to recognize it as a stroke. So if you just click on that, it creates its own little layer system, and well, here it is. It's very subtle. We're gonna have to crank it up a little, but you can get really nice clean results with this tool, in which otherwise you would maybe get an anti-alias result that kind of pixelated or something this small. You can go into the bevel options, the shape options, and really get what you want. Because there's also an XNormal plugin that technically does this, but it doesn't give you this many options. So it's just another level of tweaking that you can do. You can really go like really far with this little tool. I use it a lot and I really like it. I think they did an amazing job. So with Quixel, we also can do blah blah. Let's just make it subtle. You can change. You can make it up or down. In this case, we want it up because it's stitching. The curve, it's kind of the fall off of the stroke. We want it just linear, mostly. You can't really see it that much here. It's mostly for bigger stuff, but you can even set the blending mode. But in this case, we have it right here on the layer, and well, that is it. So here's how it looks in Marmoset. You can see it looks really clean. We use that same stroke to add to the diffuse, so we just made that a little lighter so it was even easier to see. We did the SRC with Quixel as well, and that little cross here. So it's very versatile. You can do a lot with this tool. For the helmet, we use Quixel. And here in the helmet neck, maybe that would be a little harder to get in ZBrush. It's something simple, but sometimes it's just easier to draw it in Photoshop and just turn it into a normal map later with Quixel or XNormal, whatever you're using. Okay, so here we see the boots textured. We can see the materials ready. We have some stitching here as well, done in Quixel's undo. And if we turn that, we have a metal shader, which is used for the tips. Here's the normal map. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy. gloss map, you can see, is a lot lighter on the cloth because we want it to be brighter and a lot glossier. Although metal is not that glossy, you want like a medium to high glossiness for metal, because a super glossy object is going to be something like plastic, and we don't want that. We want something medium to high. And something cool is that you can add your dirt layer and make that darker, so in your gloss map you can really see the variation. You can see the dust affect the brightness and the glossiness of your material. For the elevator map is pretty solid colors for the boot, and we just have a little bit of the scuffing and the dirt. For the spec map, we have it a little bright, especially in the scuffing, because we want that to really stand out. We want to show people the detail that you put into these textures. So here we see more scuds. It takes some tweaking to get right. Don't expect it to go perfect from the first try. But the amazing thing about Marmoset is that you can have Photoshop open and just make your tweak, save it, and it automatically changes in your viewport. You don't have to reload anything. It's just pretty straightforward. For the leather, we have this normal map that we previously made. We have our gloss map. We really wanted, well, I really wanted to show that difference in the material with the dirt and with the back of the knee. And you can see the albedo map or the diffuse map is just a pretty simple color. It's just some variation in the dirt and the knee pad, as well as the spec map. There's not that much change. You don't have to do anything crazy or something super difficult. It's just having the right balance in your maps to make your materials pop. So I'm going to show you how I pose this character. Some people like to pose in ZBrush. I personally like to pose in Maya better. I think you have more control, and you can always keep your first A or T pose, and you can even animate it if you have that skill, or you can ask your animator friends to animate it for you and have a really nice animated textured piece. In this case, I just wanted to have the sort of walking pose that it's in the concept. I wanted to match it as closely as possible. So I use this plugin called Rapid Rig in Maya. It's available in Creative Crash. So there's really not a lot of work that you have to put into it. I understand that some people are not riggers or animators, and you don't have to know a lot of this to make it work. The only thing that you have to do is basically paint your weights, which is to paint the distribution of how you want each joint to affect the mesh. And that's pretty much it. I personally, I'm not an animator, so I didn't animate it. I just left the pose frozen. So once you're happy with your pose, you just import it into Marmoset and reapply your textures, because it's obviously considered a different mesh, but it's the same materials, so nothing else has changed. So let's talk about a little bit about Marmoset. I did a pretty simple setup using an IBL from the library. You can pick anything you want, something that matches the mood that you want to use. There's a lot you can pick from, or you can even load your own HDRs if you made one, or if you found one in the internet that you like better. You can do that. You can rotate it to change the lighting direction. But in this case, we're going to use this one. If you turn it off, you can see still that we have two lights here. This light is a little bit warmer, and it's kind of like the key light, the main light you want here. But if you want a new light, you're just going to scene new light, and it creates it in your 000 space. And well, you can change everything. You change the type of light. Spotlight is one of my favorites. It just makes it look more theatrical, a little more dramatic. You can add a lot of mood with the slides. You can change the color. Well, let's make something obvious so it's easy to see what it's doing. So here you can see how is it looking. You can make it a more interesting, more spacey kind of color. Let's add some blue, some light blue. And yeah, the attenuation on curve, it just softens it. You can, just because it stops in one doesn't mean that that's the end of it. You can just add more values to it. You change the width a bit, but you can get, if you want your spec to be bigger or longer, you can really make changes to it. In this case, we don't really want that, but it's good to know that it's there if you need it. For the spotlight, in this case, which is the spot angle, which is just how wide you want your spotlight to be and how sharp you want it. A little brighter, that looks better. And the spot vignette is just really you kind of most likely want to have on, because if not, you're just going to see a square around your mesh. So let's just leave that on. Turn it a little bit, make it more like a rim light kind of thing. And that's pretty much it. After this, well, something important is that you can add your own sort of background. In this case, it's just a sphere chopped in half with a normal flip. So you render the inside of it, and with a very simple gray material. That's it. And well, of course, no spec and no gloss in this case, because I didn't really want that. Yeah, actually like that light better. So once you're happy with it, you're gonna go to your settings and set the width and height of your turntable. You wanna leave transparency on if you have transparency, and the durations is by default 1 second, but let's do something like 10 seconds. Click OK, and then in your turntable you have three options. Scene turntable, which basically turns your whole scene around, with all your lights in the same position and everything. It's just you're just going around your scene. Camera turntable is just a camera around the object. without the lights really moving with it. Just like as if you had a camera and you walked around her. And Sky Turntable just turns the HDR so you can see how the spec hits your model. But for this tutorial, we're gonna want the scene turntable. About 30 is fine. And when you want that, when you're done with that, you just click on turntable and you wait a little bit for it. So this is our final result. I hope you guys like it and you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching.